This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 328 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. This episode is all about my recent trip to Hong Kong. It's a trip report from, let's call it Hong Kong 2024. Before we begin, I'd like to pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation where I'm recording this podcast. And on that note, these days I really like to try and learn about the Indigenous people of wherever I go. And so I have been reading that in Hong Kong, this was new to me, although most of its longer-term residents, not expats, are of Cantonese descent, obviously, but there is a small minority who can trace their ancestry back to the earliest inhabitants of the space that is now Hong Kong, and these are the Punti, the Hakka, the Hoklo, and the Tanka. I'm not going to discuss these cultures in any great detail today, but I have put it on my list to learn more about them on my next trip to Hong Kong. But in the show notes, I will leave a link to an interesting article about them in case you are also curious. Now, today's episode is going to have a few parts to it. It's going to start with my key highlight of Hong Kong, then talk about some of the sightseeing I did there, a little thing I learnt, just because I love learning new kind of random things. I will also tell you about our foray into China. We spent a night and a day over the border. A forewarning, there is also a soppy Disneyland bit because at heart I am a sentimental fool. And finally, I will end with some, I'm going to call them ponderous ethical thoughts. So, beginning with the highlight, and by far the absolute highlight was, and in fact our entire real reason for heading to Hong Kong, was to visit our friends Cham and Nick and to see what their Hong Kong life is like. You may recall, if you listened to my UK trip report recently, that we went to the UK in April, this is we being my teenage son and I, to attend the wedding. That was our key reason for our trip, attend the wedding of Cham and Nick. And so since then, or just before then, they had actually moved to Hong Kong, and we had been kind of keen to visit them there. And the circumstances just arose. We had some time, had some frequent flyer points. They were going to be there and didn't have other visitors at the same time. So off we went. And that was just fabulous. So wonderful to see where they're living now, see that they're happy in their new homes. So they live, like many expats do, in Discovery Bay. Discovery Bay is almost like a purpose-built community on Lantau Island. And it is kind of has a little bit of a resort feel to it. And I think that's partly because it's a low emissions zone. So you can't have your own car there. There are a few people who have golf carts. It's very expensive to have a golf cart there. But that does feel a little like you're in a resort when you see them zooming around. But otherwise you rely on buses or walking. It's, kind of walking distance to many parts of Discovery Bay, although it's very hilly. I did get in the habit of walking down the hill to the shops and taking the bus back up the hill. But it was great to experience their life there. And it reminded me a lot of some of my expat experiences when I was living, especially in Japan and Slovakia, when, most of my friends would also be expats. So yeah, this was truly a highlight. One of my absolute favourite things to do when I travel is to meet up with friends and get to know their ordinary lives. To me, it's so special. And now that I'm back home and I continue to watch their social media posts, but I know exactly where they are and what it's like, where they live, where they work, where they shop. It's so much better. You feel more connected. I even got to go to a dog adoption event and meet their future puppy. So that was pretty exciting all around. So thanks for having us, Cham and Nick. All right, on to some of the sightseeing we did. It wasn't a focus, but we did want to have a good look around with some of the time that we had. I have been to Hong Kong only once before. It is almost exactly 40 years ago that I was there, which makes me feel incredibly old. So some things are obviously similar since that time. Some things are completely new. And also I was like 8 and turned 9 when I was there. So I really don't remember it very well. So some of the sightseeing that we did, we took the ferry from Discovery Bay over to Central, which is really handy. And we had a good wander around the Hong Kong island, essentially. So wander around sounds so casual. Mostly wandering involves going up or down. It's a very steep place. So to get up part of that, we took what is known as the Central to Mid-Levels escalators, which, of course, my teenager had seen all over TikTok or somewhere. And it's actually the longest outdoor covered escalator system in the world, apparently 800 meters worth of escalators, so nearly a kilometer, and it takes you up about 135 meters of elevation. So it's a bunch of escalators, but also some bits of covered walkway in between. And as you go up, it's just lovely because you can look out the side of the escalators and see just, restaurants and shops and everyday life and apartments. And it's kind of, I don't know, a really lovely way to sightsee, I guess. So that was very handy. From there, we decided it was time to take the iconic Hong Kong sightseeing experience of going on the Peak tram, which I also did as a kid. We had a long walk to get there because we decided that would be a fun way to do it. But my legs the next day were like, that was not bad. That was not good. So much up and down. But anyway, we took the Peak tram. If you haven't taken the Peak tram on Hong Kong Island before, it is essentially a tram, but it's super, super steep. You're sitting in it feeling like you're going to fall off the mountain in parts of it, but really cool. You get to the top and you can have some great views. Now, funnily enough, just as we got to the top, a typhoon warning was hoisted. More on typhoon warnings later. But so the weather was imperfect, but actually it meant we got kind of this misty view and some beautiful photos, and most people were staying inside, so we got to have a good wander around there. It was really cool. On another day, we also did some sightseeing on Lantau Island, which is actually where Discovery Bay is as well, to Nong Ping. So we took a bus up, but there is a cable car there to see the Tiantan Buddha. It's a giant Buddha up the top of some stairs. Quite a lot of stairs, but not too many, just enough that you think, okay, yes, I'm definitely going up. It was worth it. Beautiful views. And also in the same complex was the Po Lin Monastery, which is, just breathtakingly beautiful, colourful, gorgeous, gorgeous place. I also managed to fit in some more niche sightseeing, let's call it. So this is the kind of sightseeing I almost love the most because they're things you can see that are not on the top 10 tourist lists at all. This was on the day we were heading to a meetup of dog fosterers and potential dog adoptees. It was a really cool situation in the middle of Hong Kong Island. My friends took me to PMQ, which is like a former school and then a former police married quarters, turned into all these gorgeous little shops full of local artisans. So if you want to have, some really authentic shopping trips in Hong Kong, PMQ would be a great place to go. They even took me to the Danish Sailors Church of Hong Kong Christmas market. It was not as exciting as we thought it might be, but I still love going to those lesser known spots. So I also promised you something I learnt. And when you're traveling and you know nothing about a certain topic and then suddenly you become an expert? Well, my expert topic for the week was typhoon warnings in Hong Kong. So we arrived and our friends were animatedly talking about typhoon warnings all week, with good reason. So they work in an international school and they taught me that a T1, that's the warning. They are hoisted because traditionally they were flags that were hoisted. So they everywhere the language is, T1 warning has been hoisted. So T1 is just a warning that there are typhoons. I think that if I remember rightly, within 800 kilometres of Hong Kong. So kind of nearby, but probably not doing anything. But keep an eye on things essentially. So the other key warnings, the system has evolved, and so they're missing a lot of numbers these days. But so you go from a T1 to a T3, and a T3, if it is hoisted before 6 a.m. on a day, means that young kids, so kindergarten kids, etc., they don't go to school that day. So that's where my friends work, and so they were always keen to have a T3. They love their kids and they love their job, but of course, I understand this as I do some teaching too. A school is always an easier place if the kids aren't there. So they were very keen on that. And then we came home one afternoon and we were just hanging around at home, and then suddenly their phones were lighting up because there had been an unexpected calling of a T8. So that is, surprisingly, the next warning after T3. And when a T8 is hoisted, that means all schools are closed and teachers don't even have to go. So we were a bit worried because that sounded like it was going to be quite a nasty effect. You know, obviously that means they're expecting some real impact from a typhoon. And I was a bit concerned because we were meant to be travelling to China the next day. However, luckily, I think that there was two typhoons or two tropical storms in this case. They kind of turned other ways and the weather wasn't too bad, but our friends got to have a day off school. So everyone was happy. So now this is what I know a lot about. I took pictures of typhoon warning signs hoisted all over the place. It was hilarious in some ways. Of course, we were always kind of joking about, oh, you get the day off school or the kids aren't there. But we did always remember to say, but it would be awful if there was a serious typhoon and people were injured. So that's the downside of what I learned. But there you go. Now I'm an expert in that tiny thing. So if you need me at a quiz night where they're going to talk about Hong Kong typhoon warning levels, I'm your girl. Now, one of our most interesting days and night was our trip over the border into China. So I had seen that our friends Cham and Nick had done this trip in the last month or two on their socials. And so when I realised that this was a relatively easy trip to do, my son and I were both keen to go into quote unquote real China. So it was pretty easy from Hong Kong trains, etc., get up to the border very quickly. You enter into Shenzhen through the Lowu station. So you get out at Lowu station, which is on the border, still in Hong Kong, and then you walk across into China. Now, it felt like a much more serious border crossing than others I've been on of late. So many immigration areas now are automated. You don't even speak to an immigration officer and you don't even get a passport stamp. I mean, of course, I speak from a position of passport privilege in this case because, of course, not everyone is afforded that ease, but with an Australian passport, often it is that simple. And I lament the lack of passport stamps these days. Anyway, this one was much more, what I was used to years ago. Felt very official. Got a stamp. They asked us quite a few questions, etc. We were able to get in without a visa. It's a relatively new, I think just sometime this year, a new ruling that Australians could get in without a visa for a short trip. So that made it easy and straightforward. We might not have done it otherwise. It might not have been worth all the hassle. So obviously not obviously, but I didn't know much about Shenzhen because I kind of didn't really have it on my radar. I knew vaguely that it was a city, but it wasn't really until our friends had visited and I'd realised how close it was that we even thought of going. But it's a pretty important city, as it turns out. It's now China's third largest city. Population is almost 18 million, which is like insane. That's, more than half of Australia and in just one city. But I guess one of the reasons that wasn't really on my radar is that in 1980, so within my lifetime, it had a population of just 30,000. So it has exploded. So the Chinese government turned it into a special economic zone because of its proximity to Hong Kong, obviously, as things were changing. And then it has just grown and grown. So it, is an enormous city, but also pretty modern, obviously, because it's nearly all been built in pretty recent times. However, just over the border from Hong Kong, it felt immediately completely different. I mean, I was maybe I shouldn't have been, but I was a little bit surprised. I kind of thought, it's a border city, there'll be lots of tourism there. And I thought that probably lots more local people would have learnt some English because of tourism. But no, not that I expect people to speak English for me, but I was a bit surprised, just from a capitalist point of view that they didn't. In our whole time there, I think we only encountered two people who spoke a little English. One was the 7-Eleven owner, and the other was a boy, maybe he was 10 or so, in that same 7-Eleven. He was in his school uniform, and he spoke to my son and was practicing his English on him and told us he had a friend in Sydney and asked if my son spoke Chinese. Sadly, no, but we knew hello and thank you, and that's about it. But in our hotel, which was, quite a very modern, quite, nice hotel, not even on reception a word of English. So that was new. Google Translate helps, thank goodness. But otherwise our hotel was fabulous and so modern to me. There were robots everywhere. We were going down to breakfast when a robot hopped into the lift with us off its own accord to deliver someone's room service order. So that was new to me, took me by surprise. And in fact, I would say that our whole experience there in Shenzhen, there was a lot of high-tech stuff and also completely different tech systems and apps and stuff. Nothing that we usually use would work. We have Didi here as, an Uber alternative as well, but Didi did not work. My usual Didi app did not work in China. We had to download a special Chinese Didi. And payments were tricky. We had some cash that we had changed, fortunately, because we were worried about this being an issue. A lot of places wouldn't even take a Visa card, etc. We ended up setting up Alipay so that we could pay by card, etc. for things we were doing. So that was interesting. Now, it was only a short overnight stay, so we didn't do heaps beyond a general kind of look around by taxi. So our main outing was to the Deepen oil painting village, which our friends had recommended. And I looked up more about this, and it's a village. I mean, it's quite a vast area, and it's all artist studios selling paintings and selling art-related paraphernalia, and apparently also offering classes or, paint your own kind of things as well. But it started back in 89 with about 20 artists. Today there are over 8,000 painters. And essentially it was set up to create replicas of old paintings, like kind of out of copyright paintings. Not sure if that's technically allowed, but anyway, this is why it was set up. They had customers like Walmart, asking for huge numbers. And apparently at one stage, 60% of the oil painting replica market in the world was supplied by Deepen. So that was kind of crazy. Anyway, these days, economic downturn in the world means less people need oil paintings, apparently. So it's a bit diversified. And we had a good stroll around. We bought, we think it was a print of an original watercolour from a local artist. We have all this information about him. I think it's true. Don't know. Anyway, we like it and it didn't cost the earth and it's a good memory. But it was fascinating to explore that area. Okay, I warned you there would be a soppy Disneyland bit. Now, it may not necessarily fit the brief of being a thoughtful traveller, but I have always had a soft spot for Disney. My childhood was spent watching the Disney movie on Sunday nights and seeing the end credits, or maybe the opening as well, I'm not sure, with the Disney castle. It was just iconic to me. And some years later, in my 20s, my mum lived in California, not too far from the Los Angeles Disneyland, and I have very lovely sentimental experiences of visiting Disneyland there with my mum and riding on the spinning teacups and going through It's a Small World. And so when my son said that he was keen to go to Hong Kong Disneyland, I was like, yes, let's do it. And also the friends we were staying with have season passes, so it was a must do. Now, we got there, my son and I got there kind of early to mid-afternoon, and it was practically empty, which is, I have learnt a bonus about Hong Kong Disneyland, is that there are lots of times where the queue times for rides, etc., are much, much shorter than anywhere else in the world. So I would highly recommend Hong Kong Disneyland. It's apparently a bit smaller than, or maybe a lot smaller than some of the Disneylands, but it was plenty big enough for us. And our friends Cham and Nick joined us after they'd finished school. It was honestly such a heartwarming experience the whole afternoon and evening. We got to see, it was Christmas time, of course, so the Christmas decorations were already up, and we got to see the tree lighting show, which had like a drone light show as well. Lots and lots of rides. We were just running all over the place, going in and out of all the rides because there was nearly no queues. It was fabulous. And then the finale, the fireworks over the castle at night with the amazing soundtrack. You know, honestly, I cannot remember a time I felt so joyful with, you know, wonderful friends and my son. And it's just like, it really is set up to be a happy place. So, you know, at me if you will, but honestly, I just had the most beautiful evening. In contrast to the Disneyland spot, I do have some, what I have labelled ponderous ethical thoughts about my time in Hong Kong. I'm always trying to figure out as we travel what else is going on in a place. And there was a weird feeling in some ways living in or staying in Discovery Bay, which is obviously kind of not real Hong Kong life in some ways. It's a bit surreal. Quite a lot of people apparently have hired help, which culturally for me is still like a little bit tricky. I find that, I mean, we don't have a tradition of that in Australia, so that's just, different for me. Discovery Bay was beautiful. I mean, I will go back and stay there again. I'm more than happy. It was fabulous, but does make me think about, you know, expats in various places around the world and how that can be such a different life to the life that local people live as well. Although probably that part is less extreme in Hong Kong. That aside, more significantly, of course, is since I was in Hong Kong last, back in the 80s when it was still connected more tightly with the UK, things have changed. So Hong Kong was handed back to China in 1997. So it's still, since then, had a lot of adjusting going on. I've only really begun to understand some of this. I've been starting to learn more about it. It's very interesting, but also kind of tragic in some ways. So in many ways, it seems it's still a very separate place. So there's still Hong Kong dollars. It has its own currency. They still drive on the left like we do, like the British do. Whereas you go across the border and then in China, they're driving on the right. So some of those things are super, super separate. But things have changed. Apparently, the local schooling system is now reflective more of the Chinese system. There are now Chinese flags everywhere. Everywhere they're flying a Hong Kong flag, they also fly a Chinese flag on all the official buildings, etc. And of course, there have been, in recent years, some serious issues with democratic rights. And I was actually at the airport, literally about to fly out when the headline popped up of, the headline was dozens of pro-democracy activists jailed in Hong Kong's largest national security trial. So these things are definitely disturbing and concerning. I'm actually going to recommend a book that was a great tip from my friend Vinci, the founder of Rise Travel Institute. So Vinci grew up in Hong Kong, now lives in the US, but grew up in Hong Kong and still has family there. And she recommended the book Indelible City, Dispossession and Defiance in Hong Kong by Louisa Lim. And it's so interesting. I'm only halfway through, but continuing to read that because it explains a lot about the situation in Hong Kong from beginning to now, and is also super readable. Really, really, really interesting. So I'll leave a link to that in the show notes. Having said all that, I still loved our trip to Hong Kong so much. I found Hong Kong such a fabulous place. It was wonderful to return after nearly 40 years. It was the very first place I ever visited outside Australia. So it's always kind of loomed large in my travel psyche, I suppose. I was so keen to get back finally. Keen to go back again, learn more, see more, and very keen to visit our friends and see their growing puppy. So, thank you so much for listening to episode 328 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I would love to hear about your own experiences in Hong Kong. Pop over to the Facebook group or the LinkedIn group for Thoughtful Travellers. There's links in the show notes, or just search for Thoughtful Travellers in those sites, and you'll find us there. I will also leave links in the show notes to a few things I've referred to. For example, the article about the Indigenous cultures of Hong Kong. It's actually from the South China Morning Post's teenage section, but super interesting. I'll also leave a link to Indelible City, the book, and a link to my Instagram, Amanda Kendall on Instagram, because I've been posting heaps of my photos from Hong Kong there if you want to see what I've been up to. Don't forget as well, you can sign up for the Thoughtful Travellers newsletter at Substack, which is at thoughtfultravel.substack.com. Lots more interesting news and gossip and everything coming that way soon. So if you need any of these links, the show notes for this episode are at notaballerina.com/328. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.